Alright guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel here, and on this video we're going to show you how I do my cantlebacks on our saddles. And here I'm just skiving this cantleback piece. I've already tooled it and cased it up, and I'm just kind of skiving where things are going to fold, and that way we can get it fit to our cantleback on our tree. And here I'm just going to put a coat of glue on. That's the first thing I do. Now that leather is fairly dry. It doesn't have to be completely dry for this step, but it needs to be fairly dry. If it's still kind of wet, it's going to cause the glue to separate from the leather. But here we're just going to put a real good coat of glue on. We're going to end up going with 2 coats on all pieces. These are our plugs. We're going to do a Cheyenne roll in the saddle, so these are our plugs here that we're going to put on top of that. Okay, so here we are. We're putting our glue on the back of our cantle on our tree. And here I like to put a pretty good coat on there. These fiberglass trees, I don't really scratch them up a bunch. You can if you're worried about it sticking, but on these trees in particular, I find that glue sticks to the fiberglass pretty good. And then here I'm just going through with my second coat of glue. And I just kind of make a round. I start with the cantleback, then go to my plugs, go to my tree, go back. By the time I get back to my cantleback, it's usually dry enough for a second coat. I don't have to wait very long. And so just go ahead and put our second coat on all pieces. So here we are. I've let the glue dry good. It's good and tacky. It's completely dry. Once that happens, I'll put it in my case bucket or my water or my sink, whatever you're using, and I'm going to let that soak really good and get really wet. Once the water's kind of made it through, that glue's going to prevent that side. That glue will be completely fine as long as it's good and dry. That water can't penetrate it. So then we'll put it on top of the bench, and just going to kind of dry it off with some paper towels, get all the water off. And you'll still feel this glue is still really tacky, so it doesn't have any effect on that. But that's a good way to go ahead and get it prepped and put your glue on first. Now before I stick it on, I go ahead and put one more real light thin wet coat, and I'm going to put this coat on the tree mainly so I don't get glue on my hands when I'm dealing with the piece of leather. But I'm going to put it on the tree, and I'm going to immediately try to get my cantleback on there. What that's going to do is cause a wet barrier between the 2 dried sections of glue, so that you have a little bit of time there to be able to move that around, so you can kind of shift it and slide it if you need to. Because if you don't put that thin wet layer in there first, then you will, once you put it on, it's stuck, and then when you pull it, if you have to reposition it and you move it, you're going to pull the glue loose from one side or the other, either the leather or the tree. And so that little wet layer will kind of give you a little bit of time there where you can kind of shift things around and move things around. And I'm just lining that up. I've already made my marks when I initially fit this piece for the tooling. So I'm just making sure everything lines up, making sure it's centered, checking to make sure that my bottom against my tree is level as it comes around there, making sure we've got it tucked in place really nice. And then I'm taking my wooden stick. I've just got a piece of hardwood that's got a kind of a chisel end that's real blunt, and this allows me to just kind of make sure that bottom is tucked up in there really nice, and it's stuck really good. And you want to get this, nice and tight. Make sure you rub your hand on it, make sure it's glued down everywhere. And then I'm cutting at the very base of the cantle as it comes to the bars, just cutting that straight and trimming that out. That's where we're going to start our fold for our Cheyenne roll. So we just kind of fold that back. It should be glued against the tree really well, so you should have to work to kind of get it folded around. And I'm tapping it with a hammer just to get a good nice crease all along the top edge there. And I try to keep that fairly even with the top edge of the cantle, because our plugs are going to go right on top of that. And so I want to make a really good hard crease where that'll lay down, and as we put our plugs on, it'll glue up tight in that crevice there where the plugs are going to go. So as you can see there, I'm just kind of using my cantle top as where my crease is going to be. And if you did all your layout marks correctly when you initially fit the cantleback, your tooling and everything, the spacing between the edge of your tooling and the top edge of that should be fairly consistent. You do get a little bit of stretch during the tooling process, but it should fit fairly good. So here I'm getting my cantle plugs. Like I said, they've already been glued. The top edge of the cantle is glued, the cantle back is glued, and I'm just going to tuck that bottom edge of the way my pattern works is I put that all the way down as far as I can up against the top of the bar at the base of the cantle, and I run it ahead of the edge of the cantle top a quarter inch or so. I just want a little bit of overhang because we're going to come back in and skive that flush with the inside edge of the cantle, and then all that glue is going to help to hold that in. And as I pull it around the top of the edge of the cantle to the center of the cantle, I'm kind of pulling it some, and that particular pattern works well to get the right pitch and angle of my Cheyenne rolls. So that's the reason I'm kind of pulling that, and then I'm just going to cut that on my center mark. I have a center mark on the top of the cantle, so I know where that is, and I'm just going to meet that. It's not really crucial, but I like center marks. I like center lines so that I can balance other things and use that as a reference point. So once your plugs are on, if they meet perfectly in the middle, then you can still notice where your center line of the cantle is, and that'll help you later in the build. And then we just pull together and meet that cantle back up to the plug and just kind of make sure all that's glued together. Then we'll come in here with our second side, and as you can see, I'm going all the way down to the bottom and then pulling it around to meet with the center of the top of the cantle, and just making sure that it's glued down good to the top edge of the cantle. You don't want any gap. We're going to come back through and nail this, but that glue is going to help to hold it in place and make sure you've got a good fit. And I'm just making a mark of where the other plug is that we just put on. Now I can draw me a line and then cut on that line, and that way they match up perfectly in the middle. And if you do this correctly, the seam will match up perfectly, and you won't have any kind of gap that'll show up later when you go to put your binder on or your seat or anything like that. Now you can do this with a one-piece plug. A lot of guys, they have a pattern that's a whole one complete piece instead of two pieces. I used to use those as well. I prefer the two-piece just because I can get a better pitch on my cantle. I don't want it coming out straight with a horizon. I want it to kind of pitch downward towards the back end of the saddle, and I want the sides to curve backwards as well. And in order for me to get that, this little pattern here has worked best for me, and so that's what I use. So these are the nails that I use. I use a little panel nail. You can get these at any hardware store. They're just they come in all kinds of colors. They're little ring shank panel nails. I think they're 1 inch, 1 1/4. Just kind of figure out what size you like. But those are the ones I get. Unfortunately, they only come in little bitty boxes, but they're like a couple of bucks a box. But I just usually buy a dozen boxes or so every so often. And they work really well for this, as they're small nails. That's a lot of times the top edge of that cantle is very thin and not very thick or wide, and so you need a nice sharp nail that you can go and get it in there without it coming out the front of your cantle or coming out through the back side through your cantle back. So, and I just nail those in. I space them probably 3/4 of an inch or so apart, and I think it's very important that you nail this down. A lot of guys will run that forward into the dish of the cantle and then nail it down from the front of the cantle edge. I just don't personally like to do it that way, so this is the best way that works for me, but there's certainly other ways you can do it. But these little nails are pretty handy. I will say, if you get one in there that you don't want there, or it comes out through the front of your cantle or through your cantle back, and you've got to pull it, you will cuss, because they are pretty tough to get out of there, the little ring shank nails. Now I leave the very bottom ones out because I'm going to trim here. Now I just put my finger down flat where I'm on top of the bar, and then basically make a little mark. That finger thickness is the same thing I'll do on the other side, and that's to ensure that my cantle comes around and it's even from one side to the other, and that way when you cut your seat ears, that's your point of reference. So if those aren't even, then your seat ears will be off when you look at it from the horn looking back at the seat. And then I just cut that line. And what we're trying to do when we're cutting here is trying to leave space for the housing to fit up underneath there, but also not have the cantle so high off of the rigging or there that you get a gap between your ear and the base. You want that all as tight and close as possible, but you have to leave some room for the housing to fit up underneath there, and you've got to take into consideration the binder. Now when using a head knife, if you're going to cut this with a head knife, just be careful, because this is usually where somebody will cut themselves with a head knife or a round knife, just to keep your hands out of the way. I get a little close sometimes with my hand, but that's just how I do it. Don't necessarily follow what I'm doing there. And I'm just trimming down, trimming kind of where it's level with the horizon, where I've got good clearance underneath there, and I'm kind of looking. I usually try to keep that spacing from the bottom of my Cheyenne roll to my rigging where I can get the tip of my index finger underneath it. That's usually enough to fit my housing after the binder's on. So that's what I kind of use as a point of reference. But like I said, where my hand placement was right there cutting that piece, don't do it that way. Keep your hands out of the way. But then I'll come back through and just kind of skive this down. I want that to float in. I don't necessarily want it to go to nothing, but I want it to float in. I don't want it quite as thick right there, because that's where my seat's going to fold and that's where my ear is going to come around. And so I want a nice flow to that and a nice taper there. And then I'll come back and put my final nail just to clinch that tip of my Cheyenne roll down. And as you can see right there, that end of that plug is a nice even taper going up to the thickness. Now this here, I'm just taking my skiver and just skiving flush with the inside edge of the cantle and taking off that little bit of excess. You can sure meet that up with the inside edge of the cantle if you want when you're putting the plugs on. The problem I find with that is when you go to nailing it in, those nails sometimes will pull that back. As they seat, they'll pull that plug back off of the cantle, and if you don't overset it a little bit, then you end up with a gap, and then you have to glue a piece of leather in there and fill that in, or you'll get a bump on the inside of your cantle when your seat goes in. So I always overhang and then just come back through after it's nailed in and clinched. Now it can't move. Now I'll go through and just skive it to meet flush, and that way it makes a nice crisp smooth transition from cantle as it goes over the top of the Cheyenne roll. And now when your seat goes in, everything will be smooth and even. And if you get those nails a little close, sometimes you'll hit them with your blade, and then they're kind of aggravating. But it's better. I find it better to deal with that than it is to deal with having a plug that's come back some or that sort of thing. But as you can see there, we're just cleaning this whole inside up. This is kind of where everything comes together as far as how well your seat's going to look, and how even your seat and your ears and your binder and all that's going to look here. Now I go back through, and then I take my skiver and I just skive that leather area around the nails. Sometimes those nails, when you really clench them down, they cause a little bit of a bump in between each nail, and so I just go through and just kind of touch that area up a little bit. That's all I'm doing right there. I'm not taking a lot of leather off. I'm just making sure it's smooth, so that when you stand at the horn and look towards the back, you're not seeing any bumps in your final binder. And so I'm just making sure that's smooth, and then I'm just trimming the excess of my cantle, anything that's sticking out from my plugs. So that's it. That's pretty much, now we're ready with that saddle there. I'm ready to block in my seat and skirts. I hope y'all found this interesting. Like I said, everybody does cantlebacks and binders and plugs a little bit different, but that's the easiest way that I found that works for me. I appreciate y'all watching the video. Subscribe to our channel if you would like to see more videos like this or need more information. There's a lot of information and instruction on our website at dgsaddlery.com. And as always, you can send me an email, and if you got any more questions or if you have any ideas for another show. Thanks.